Welcome to CBS Sports HQ. I'm Chris Hassel. As we get you over the hump today, sliding into Final Four weekend, the women's Final Four beginning Friday in Tampa, men's Final Four Saturday in San Antonio. We have all one seeds across the board, except for the second-seeded UConn women. Ironically, the only team that's minus money to win it all. On the men's side, Duke is the favorite at even money. They play the Houston Cougars in the Saturday nightcap. We're going to break that down for you a little bit later this afternoon, but we're going to start with the first matchup on Saturday, which is actually the second matchup of the season between Auburn and Florida. Todd Golden's Gators beat Bruce Pearl's Tigers in Auburn back in February. Now one of those teams is going to be the first SEC school to play for a national title since Kentucky in 2014. Here's how they celebrated.
Hey, we look for three things when we recruit Gators. We want great attitudes, great work ethics, most importantly, guys that want to wear Florida on that chest. I don't care that these guys wear red tie. They're badass players, man. They go into the Final Four now.
You know where we're going, Tracy?
You're going to the Final,
to the Final Four! Yeah!
Auburn and Florida, Mike O'Donnell and Kyle Boone. And Mike, as you know, that these teams played in the jungle a couple of months ago. What kind of adjustment do you see Bruce Pearl making in the rematch after really being dominated by Todd Golden's Gators?
I think it was a bit eye-opening for, I think, a lot of college basketball fans. You know, leading up until that point, it was very obvious just how relentlessly good Auburn was throughout the course of the season, and really just the whole regular season. I mean, they were the best team. You know, if you look at resume and metrics and all of it, I mean, I understand you can make a case for Duke. You know, you could make a case for Florida, but Auburn was the best overall team. And in that game especially, I thought was really interesting, Florida's front court completely dominated Auburn in that game. And Alex Condon and Thomas Houck, they combined for 33 points and 19 rebounds. And it just never felt like Auburn could get anything inside of the paint, around the rim. Nothing was smooth. Nothing was easy. And as much as we talk about Walter Clayton Jr., and we will talk a lot about him, and deservedly so, he's an All-American, it's actually Florida's front court that was the difference maker in that game, and honestly has been the difference maker for the entire season for the Gators. But that matchup in particular, rebounding, even though we can dive into the analytics, Chris, and I know how much you love when I dive into the analytics, it's going to come down to the simple things. There's going to be a lot of winning plays for Auburn by not giving up offensive rebounds. They actually, out of all four Final Four teams, they have the worst offensive rebounding rate in terms of giving up offensive rebounds out of all four teams, the three other teams in the Final Four. That's going to be a huge deal. It sounds simple, it sounds obvious, but that is something that Auburn must fix in that matchup.
Yeah, and to echo Mike's point here, I think Auburn will come out with a plan. Florida did surprisingly take down Auburn at a time when Auburn clearly looked like the #1 team in college basketball, and they have not looked like that the last couple of weeks, to be clear. But that game in particular was kind of the eye-opening moment where Florida's depth really revealed itself, and the front court in particular started playing like the best front court in college basketball. This is going to be a test for Auburn, not only because they lost the last matchup, but also because Auburn, as we'll get to in a few minutes, is walking wounded into this matchup. Janai Broome dealing with an elbow injury. So, you know, I think this will be on Auburn's backcourt coming into this game, because you've got Florida playing at a high level, particularly with Walter Clayton. Dealing with him is going to be a huge test for this Auburn backcourt. Tahad Pettiford's going to have to step up. They're going to need big minutes from Chad Baker-Mazara. So, you know, the front court, the backcourt, everything is going to have to be firing on all cylinders for Auburn to go and win this game and punch a ticket to the national championship game.
Kyle mentioned that injury to Janai Broome, not practicing again today. They're hoping to get him back on Thursday with that hyperextended non-shooting elbow, but we don't know at this point. Kyle, we know he's a gamer. We know that he's going to try to fight through it, but we saw him out there basically playing with one arm at the end of that Elite Eight game. Can they afford not to have him close to 100%?
I actually think they can, Chris. You're talking about one of the top 2 players in college basketball this season. So that seems like a tough task, right, for this Auburn team that has really relied on him throughout the season. And it's not the first time that Broome has been dealing with injury this season. He injured his shoulder earlier this season. He's been dealing with a nagging ankle injury. Here, as you can see, he comes down awkwardly and hyperextends his elbow. Yes, he did return to the game. He grabbed a one-handed rebound. He knocked down a three-pointer. That was awesome. I think it gave him a huge emotional lift. But the fact that he's playing, at least in that game, with one arm, not an encouraging sign. And he missed 2 practices this week. We'll see if he's able to get back to practice in some limited fashion before this weekend. But, I think Auburn is going to have to rely on playing without him, or at least not playing through him as they have this season. They're going to have to rely on some of their front court to step up. They're going to have to play through their guards, as they've done sometimes throughout the NCAA tournament. This is going to be a huge ask for Auburn, who I think even if Broome plays, is probably not going to be 100%.
Yeah, kind of following up on a key phrase that Kyle just said there, not relying on Broome. Something that's vitally important for Auburn in this game. Since the start of the SEC tournament, Auburn has shot barely over 30% from 3. Now, this is, you have to treat Auburn like a team that's going to shoot over 35 to 38% from 3, but they have not shooting the 3-ball well at all. And in order to not rely on Johni Broome, Auburn has to make threes. Unequivocally, they have to shoot so much better than they have since the start of the SEC tournament. There's been an inconsistency from the three-point line, and you brought up Pettiford. He needs not just a good game. Like, Pettiford has to be off the charts good in this game. Not necessarily from just taking tons of shots, but taking the right shots. And he needs to hit at least 4 threes in this game, I think, for Auburn to win. He can do that. But going back to Broome one more time, let's just put a percentage on it. If you assume that Johni Broome is at 70% health, 70 to 75%, he gets himself ready to go at that level, that's still probably a guy that gets you 17 points and 7-8 rebounds a game. And if you're making threes and Broome is in that 15 to 17 point range and that 6 to 8 rebounding range, which is, a drop, 20% drop of his average, you can win that game. You absolutely are able to perform and rely on other guys. But, the one thing, Kyle, I will say, and Chris, no hero ball for Auburn. It can't be Chad Baker-Mazara taking shots that he thinks feels like 5 or 6 points when it really is only a 2-pointer or a 3-pointer. That has to be on lock. They got to play a perfect game from a Wings perspective.
Well, these teams know each other well. These coaches know each other very well. Bruce Pearl, Todd Golden go way back to when Pearl coached him in Israel 15 years ago. Then Pearl gave him his real coaching start a little more than a decade ago on that Auburn staff. Here's Pearl on his pupil.
Todd was a great point guard, a great scoring point guard, and I always said, don't be fooled by that little Shane Aponum. That's that beautiful face. He's a good-looking kid, but he's a tough guy. And his teams play hard, they play physically, and so don't let that sheepish look fool you. He's the real deal.
Golden, the guy who came over from San Francisco after leading them to the tournament. But I think going into this year, there weren't a lot of people, Kyle, that knew who Todd Golden was, other than some of that stuff that was floated out there off the court that he's been cleared on. How did he get this thing on this track to lead Florida from outside the top 20 preseason all the way to a dominant Final Four run?
Yeah, it's really impressive, like the roster that he's put together. And earlier this season, Todd Golden talked about his strategy to building this Florida team was basically trying to mimic the prime Golden State Warriors, which sounds very lofty, a little crazy, but also if you look at the way that Florida's played this season, it's kind of played out that way. He wants guys at every single position to be able to pass, to dribble, and to shoot. And certainly their guards have done that at a high level. But I think the way that Florida has elevated its way this season is by having front court players from, power forwards to centers who can pass, dribble, and shoot. When Alex Condon is able to put the ball on the floor and attack dribble handoffs and be able to attack the basket. That is a different dimension that not a lot of teams have. So, I wouldn't say that Florida is the prime Golden State Warriors, but they certainly have a lot of talent, and at every position they have been able to consistently beat teams and overwhelm teams with their depth throughout the season. Even in the NCAA tournament, they've been their backs against the wall against UConn in the second round, against Texas Tech in the Elite Eight, and they have just been able to wear teams down by punching consistently throughout 40 minutes and ended up winning. So, it's impressive what they put together to make it to this Final Four.
And, we talk a lot about Duke, and we've never seen a team this efficient on the offensive end, essentially, and all the metrics and the Ken Palm analytics. And it's otherworldly what Duke is doing. The team that is closest to fully embodying what Duke does offensively throughout the season, not just the NCAA tournament, is the Florida Gators. And Kyle's point about the front court is more than just spot on. You go watch Florida play. When you've got 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot out on the perimeter, orchestrating the offense at the top of the key, their post players are the key to their offense. As much as Walter Clayton Jr. is an All-American, he's going to be an NBA player. He's been arguably the best point guard in the entire NCAA tournament. It is Florida's front court that initiates so much of the offense. Walter Clayton succeeds really on the shoulders of what Florida's bigs can do on the perimeter. If we're at the top of the key, whether they're running types of Princeton action or chin action or zoom, and everything they do from a passing standpoint, and then being able to crash the offensive glass, you got to think about, why are they such a good offensive rebounding team? Well, a lot of times their posts are at the three-point line, and you get a running start to the rim. Sounds simple and obvious. That's not the way a lot of teams are built, which makes them very, very difficult to scout against.
Florida played 10 games in the month of March, 7 against ranked teams. They won all 10 of those games. They're a slight favorite, 2.5 point favorite in this game. Kyle, who do you like?
Yeah, I like Auburn in this matchup, and I'm going to roll with the underdog. I think the big question here is obviously Janai Broom's status, but we talk about Florida's depth a lot, and I do think Florida probably has a slight advantage when it comes to depth, but don't sleep on Auburn's depth, man. Miles Kelly, Denver Jones, Tahad Pettiford, Chad Baker-Mazara, that is a really, really good backcourt that I think can make enough shots in this game against Florida. Florida's shown some leakage, right, since the SEC tournament. They look like the best team in the SEC tournament, no question, but they've had their backs against the wall several times in the NCAA tournament. Look like they could be eliminated. I think Auburn has the horses to get the Gators out of the NCAA tournament and advance into the title game.
Now, I'm picking Auburn for 2 reasons. Number one, just in spite of the multiple Florida Gators inside of the CBS HQ offices. And number 2, turnovers. Kyle just alluded to it a little bit. One of the issues in the NCAA tournament for Florida, and actually if you go back and you look at the losses in the regular season, they're getting double-digit turnovers. And the last 3 NCAA tournament games, Florida has had at least 10, if not more, turnovers. That's an issue against the way Auburn plays defense. I think that's going to be something that Auburn is going to lean in on and really try to exploit. I don't necessarily think they come from Walter Clayton Jr., those turnovers, but the wings have a tendency to over-dribble, over-attack, and there's going to be opportunities for there. I believe that Broom will be as close, he's going to be over 75% healthy. At least, mentally he'll get himself there. Number 2, I think they'll be able to fix the offensive rebounding issue. And number 3, I think Auburn will have less turnovers in this game. And those 3 things is the reason why I'm picking Auburn. I expect this game to be phenomenal. This is going to be a 1 or 2 possession game, I think, for the entire 40 minutes. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little overtime in this Final Four game.
SEC, the first conference to have multiple 1 seeds in the Final Four since 1985 when the Big East got Georgetown and St. John's in there. And Florida and Auburn are going head-to-head in the semis. Tip time 6:09 Eastern time on CBS and streaming live on Paramount+. And then that Houston-Duke game, the nightcap, 30 minutes after Florida-Auburn is done. Mike O'Donnell and Kyle Boone will be back with us to discuss our All-America team. Our CBS Sports top 5 players in college basketball, 3 of them still playing. All right, once we get over the hump today, it's a downhill slide into Final Four weekend. Is it chalky? Sure, but loaded up with two elite matchups, you better believe it. Duke and Houston aren't just top-line teams in respect to this tournament. They're number one in offense and defense, respectively. Someone who for sure is salivating over this matchup is our guy, Mike O'Donnell. MOD, always great to see you, man. We are in for one on Saturday night between the Blue Devils and Cougars, aren't we?
It's going to be epic. It's the literal number one defense versus the number one offense. And this is, I understand there's a lot of frustration from the college basketball sickos out there about this being too chalky, but we are going to get the absolute heavyweight battle in the nightcap. And between Houston's defense, they're the number one scoring defense in the country, number one in defensive field goal percentage. And this is also Kelvin Sampson's best three-point shooting team he has ever had. So we already know that it is arguably his best defense he's ever had. Now we're getting his best three-point shooting team. Good luck getting 60 points against Houston. But now comes Duke. Duke put up offensive efficiency numbers that we've never seen. It's essentially the highest-rated offense in Ken Palm's history. We've never seen a team this efficient. One thing that's really interesting about Duke in terms of how Houston's going to defend them is how they can play five-out offense. They're not just relying on pick and roll. Anybody that knows anything about pick and roll defense with Houston, they're elite. But Duke can really spread you out, play five-out offense. Malawach is probably the most underappreciated post player in the country because of his passing ability. You already know about Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel, and then Tyrese Proctor just getting it done. This is going to be epic. I'm excited to see. I will say, though, that Duke, the closest team that Duke has played to compare to Houston is Auburn, right? And they beat Auburn. Auburn was coming off that gauntlet of Maui, and there's always kind of that Maui hangover that a lot of teams get after they win the Maui Invitational and go through that gauntlet. But Houston is a little bit more battle-tested than Duke. The physicality is going to have – this will be the most physical team that Duke is going to have to play against. And the X's and O's battle between John Shire and Kelvin Sampson, it's going to be a joy to watch. I can't wait.
I want to talk to those college basketball sickos, as you call them. I'm sorry, are you not interested in watching the best versus the best?
That's right.
I'll never understand that. The upsets are fun early, but give me what we've got every year if we could get it. I'm good with that. LJ Cryer can become the first player ever, MOD, to win a national championship at two different schools. Will we see it again because of the new age of the transfer portal? Yeah, maybe. But to be the first here, boy, that would be something.
Yeah, certainly could be. I don't know if you're talking about a consistent trend, but it's way more of a reality than it's ever happened. And LJ Cryer came from Baylor, where he was good. And I think the system at Baylor was good for him, but the system at Houston is great for him. And because of his defensive ability, he has way more freedom on the offensive end with Houston's offensive system and their culture. He stood it perfectly. It took him maybe a summer to get used to how intense Kelvin Sampson is, how locked in the Houston culture is, especially defensively, and then the off-the-court stuff. But I also see, we also have Elijah Martin in the Final Four, who now you have a player who played in two Final Fours on two different teams, right? So you got Elijah Martin playing in the Final Four in Florida Atlantic, and he's playing for Florida in the Final Four now. So is it a trend that's going to be a consistent thing? Probably not. It's just for the sheer fact of, Chris, if you brought it down to like the Sweet 16 or the round of 32, but getting to a Final Four with two different teams, my goodness, almost impossible, I think, even in the transfer portal era.
All right, that number one defense has been preparing all week for the number one pick in this summer's NBA draft. Of course, that's Cooper Flagg. He's looking to become the first player since Anthony Davis to win the title and then go at the top of the draft. He'd only be the fifth player ever to pull off that double in the same year since the NBA-ABA merger. Cooper Flagg, obviously a huge difference maker in this season for Duke and in this weekend for the Blue Devils as well. What does he need to do, Mike, to be successful against this Cougars defense?
Everything about Houston's defense is about taking away their best player, number one. And then number two, Houston survives off of their gap help defense. Cooper Flagg needs to have a very, very, very low turnover game. And that may sound like a very simple cliche thing. I just can't even stress how important that is. Cooper Flagg can't have 20 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and 7 or 8 turnovers. That is a losing formula for Duke because of how quickly Houston can go from a steal turnover into their fast break offense. They're one of the most efficient transition offensive teams in the country because of their suffocating defense and their spacing and transition offense. So I know on the surface you say, hey, don't turn the ball over. But keeping that turnover number under 4 for Cooper Flagg, paramount in that matchup.
All right, not an easy task against this Houston defense. Mike O'Donnell with us here on HQ. Thank you, man. The odds to win it all in Duke's favor. Plus money still at plus 105, followed by the Gators, Cougars, and Tigers.
We got our Mackenzie Brooks joining us now on our HQ set. So we're going to take a look at the odds to win it all. We have a Duke winning 37% of the simulations from Sportsline. What have you seen from that squad that aligns with those odds?
And the craziest part is, like, 37 compared to plus 105. Plus 105 implies almost 50% chance. Right. And I thought we were high on Duke. Clearly, you're seeing odds makers feel the same way here as well. Crazy to see a 1 seed so favored against just 3 other 1 seeds, right? But there's so much to like about this team, not a lot to dislike. You saw Mike talk about it. The only thing potentially working against this team is the turnovers, right? We have them projected for 10, Houston only for 8. That could be the one deciding stat category that we see if they potentially go down in the Final Four. But we even like them if they make it past this Houston team against Florida, who has been relatively sloppy in March specifically, so not as concerned about that turnover battle once they hit Florida, who we think will beat Auburn this weekend.
Okay. Mackenzie Brooks with us here in studio on HQ. Thank you. A reminder, if you aren't using Sportsline, I don't know what you're doing, but we're going to make it easier for you here. 60% off an annual plan when you use the promo code on your screen, winners. Use that QR code as well to sign up now.
Did you know that all 4 1 seeds advanced to this year's Final Four out in San Antonio? The last time that happened, believe it or not, was in 2008, and it also happened in San Antonio. However, this year's class, extremely stacked when it comes to players to watch, matchups to watch. There's a lot of things that we want to point your attention to. And to do so, let's get an early look at all the madness as we welcome in our Chip Patterson. We've also got Mackenzie Brooks joining us. We're going to get into some of the matchups with these Final Four games, some things to watch. So let's start with that Florida versus Auburn game. Again, all these are 1 seeds, so I'm not going to waste time saying 1 versus 1 here. Chip, your focus in this game between Florida and Alabama, or Florida and Auburn rather, are the bigs in this matchup. Rebounding going to be the key game changer here. So tell us a little bit more about what excites you when it comes to Janai Broome versus Ruben Chinalu, maybe?
Yeah, listen, big dogs only in this Final Four, and we're going to focus on the bigs in the early matchup because what we've got is a spot that impacts both their individual skills but also their team strengths and team weaknesses. So Ruben Chinalu is one of the best offensive rebounders in the entire country, and Florida as a team really relies on offensive rebounding. Key number right here, 37% offensive rebounding percentage. When they rebound 37% or better of their misses, they are 20-1 this season. They fall below that line. That's the upset loss to Georgia. That's the upset loss to Missouri. And that is the 64-44 pounding that they took at the hands of Tennessee. So for Florida, yeah, they're good at outside shooting, but being able to clean up on the glass is key. And Janai Broome, who is one of the best players in the entire country, is also one of the best defensive rebounders individually. But this is the key. Auburn, as a team, not a great defensive rebounding team. So this is where it's got to be Broome limiting Florida to just 1 attempt. This has got to be Broome letting you know who's who and what's what down low. Because if they give up that advantage that they have with one of the best big men in the entire country, well, then I think Florida's going to be able to eat up the glass, and that's going to give them a better chance to win.
The funny part is, like, Chinalu definitely a very, very big part of this, but what Florida has going for them is they got 3 big hosses, right? Like, this isn't just his game to play. You have 3 guys you can throw in there that accumulate for a full-time center who's on the court the entire time. Like, we have all 3 of those Florida centers projected for 13 rebounds while Broome's only 10, and it really feels like Broome versus the world here. And you have Hanglogden, who literally, he's just going in to rough up Broome. Like, the thing with Florida is they have 15 fouls to give between the 3 of them. them, and Broome has to be careful here. So just the depth of the Florida bigs and the Florida centers that you're going to see, I mean, the three of them combined have the same, if not better, rebound rate than you're going to see from Broome. So that is where, in our model, like the offensive rebounds, specifically in rebounds in general, that's where Florida's winning this battle, and that's why we ultimately have Florida winning the game.
Chip, really quick, I want to follow because Bruce Pearl told us that Janai Broome did not practice yesterday or today dealing with that elbow injury. How much does that impact sort of the numbers that you're watching when it comes to Broome?
Yeah, I think it's significant. Not that I don't think he's going to be out there. I think he is. Not that I don't think he's going to be giving it his all. I think he will. But let the big man fall, big tree fall hard, and he bangs that elbow again. If it leads to any kind of discomfort that impacts his ability to score, his ability to secure the ball, then that is going to be entirely game-changing. So it doesn't feel like anything that matters before tip-off, but it is something that will set off red alert sirens if he has any further injury in the game.
That one getting underway at 6:09 Eastern on Saturday. The other one, of course, coming courtesy of Houston and Duke. We know that the defense will shine in this one, right? Houston is known for their defense. We just saw Duke lock up Alabama in that last game. But, Chip, the key statistic you're following here is blocks and two-point percentage, particularly when it comes to Kaman Malawach and some other guys as well. Walk us through what you're watching there in that matchup.
Yeah, this is one of the great things that Houston has been able to do is that even though they trot out 6'8", 6'7", and 6'6", their wingspans are 7'4", 7'5", and beyond. And that is how a team that has starting big men under 6'10" end up being one of the best shot blocking teams in the entire country. That is how a Houston team that doesn't have anybody above 6'10" in the rotation ends up going out and getting you some of the best rebounding efforts that we saw in the Big 12 all season long. But they ain't got to play many like Kaman Malawach. And I think that his presence at the rim and to be able to deny any attempts at the glass, to be able to clean things up when it comes to rebounding, two-point percentage offense and defense, that is slamming home dunks, that is slamming home putbacks, and that is blocking shots at the rim all season long. JoJo Tugler, Xavier Francis, these players who are long and athletic have been able to overcome so much. But, man, they have not had to face many forces down low like what Duke has with Malawach. So, yeah, who's going to be able to get more blocks and who's going to be able to have the higher percentage of shots converted and denied closer to the rim, I think is a huge factor. Because if you do that otherwise, it's just a three-point shootout, and that's not going to be good for either team. Yeah,
you hit the nail on the head here. I think Malawach in general is such an X factor in this game. His two-point percentage in general, which is absolutely absurd, what you just saw there, because it is 4 dunks and 4 lobs a game, which is, rock on, get your points the way you want to get them. But how do you stop that? Even though they have 2 great centers who accumulate for 1 full-time center, they're still barely out-rebounding Malawach here. And that's so hard to stop. And he's also not putting up a ton of field goal attempts per game. He needs to not get in foul trouble. Him getting in foul trouble could be the downfall of this Duke team. So I know Cooper flagged this, Cooper flagged that, but Malawach staying out of foul trouble, being competitive, making those offensive putbacks that Houston always has and finds easy, making them not so easy, and we do think it will be quite a battle down low.
We got a bonus play for you, Chip, because we know that you are one of our college basketball sickos here. We got to ask you about Cooper Flagg and Duke. It's interesting when you look at this matchup against a guy like, let's say, Juwan Roberts, maybe when it comes to the experience. You've got a guy who's played 4 NCAA tournament games versus a guy who's playing his 17th on deck here in this matchup. What's going to be the matchup what's going to be the thing you're watching in this matchup between those two guys?
I know we're supposed to focus on math and numbers, but I need vibes, y'all. We got to look at the vibes here. So, Juwan Roberts, 5th-year senior, all 5 of those years with Kelvin Sampson at Houston. We see a lot of 5th-year seniors, but not a lot of players who spend all those years at the same time. You mentioned this will be Roberts' 17th NCAA tournament game where he has appeared. He's been on the active roster for even more than that with all the success that Houston has had in the NCAA tournament. And I just wonder if Roberts, somebody who will go out to the perimeter and be one of the primary defenders in a pick and roll, I wonder if he uses some of that experience. He uses some of that old man strength. He uses some of the wisdom that he's gotten along the ways to maybe get the better of the #1 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Because that's the thing about Cooper Flagg in this matchup. He's going to be everywhere. They let him bring the ball up the floor. They let him operate down low. They let him start on the wing. But as you saw here against Alabama, a couple of turnovers, things got a little bit loose. Can this Houston team, with Jawan Roberts leading the way, be able to use some of that experience, some of that NCAA tournament and Final Four experience to close what is absolutely a talent gap with our now announced CBS Sports National Player of the Year?
Yeah, I think the thing with Cooper Flagg is sometimes when his three-point percentage isn't really great, he starts like panicking, and then the turnovers just fumble over. You mentioned that Alabama game, definitely not a great showing for him. While I don't think Roberts, steal numbers will necessarily directly correlate to the turnovers for Cooper Flagg, like Cooper Flagg does need to keep this a clean game, and 100% Roberts will limit his offensive production. It's about, can Duke handle that, right? Do they have a game plan for when Cooper Flagg can't be an offensive juggernaut and a defensive juggernaut here? So I think as long as Duke as a team is mentally prepared for what Roberts is going to do to Flagg, it's about the vibes of that team at that point. Do they know how to use him in different ways?
Well, and even if Cooper Flagg doesn't have the vibes, his teammate Con Kneppel will as well. He's been hooping out there at all cylinders. There's just a lot of vibes on the Duke roster right now. Chip Patterson and Mackenzie Brooks joining us to break down the vibes, but also some matchups to watch. Back here on HQ Spotlight, we have Mackenzie Brooks with us here in studio because, of course, we were talking about March Madness. It is all chalk on the Riverwalk. We've been saying it. All 4 1 seeds have made it to the Final Four. So how do we differentiate between the X factors and what are the stats saying, this tail of the tape, if we really want to get into the weeds in terms of these 1 seeds and who has the advantage?
We got the time today, right?
We do have the time, of course. If we're talking about the Final Four, we have all the time in the world, right? So, Ken, we're going to break down each matchup, starting with Auburn and Florida here, and we're looking at from 2-point percentage, from 3, rebounds, all of that stuff. This is pretty evenly matched, but the Gators are the best offensing rebounding team in the country for a reason. They have a slight edge, but really walk us through all of this, Kens, and tell us where the differences are, and it's really coming down to the boards.
Exactly. I always come on here and I have these random projected scores, and you're thinking, where did they come up with that? Where does that come from? And it comes down to looking at these stats side by side, and we have a really close game here with Auburn, Florida, and that's because, look, like our 2-point percentage, basically the same, 3-point percentage, basically the same. It is those rebounds. Again, limiting the offensive rebounds specifically for this Florida team is going to be so tough, especially with Broome not being 100%. You see the depth that this Florida team has as well. They have a lot more wriggle room. They have more fouls to give, right, in general, and just to be more aggressive. So that's certainly where you're seeing the edge here and why we slightly have Florida in this game. Another key factor that really could swing the tables here is what are we getting from Broome, right? We haven't projected for 6 of 14 shooting. If that becomes 8 of 14 shooting, that becomes an Auburn win, right? So it's just these fine details. Same 3-point percentage we have projected here. I will say, Auburn on the road through the regular season overall had a lot better splits than Florida did on the road. So if you want to look at it from that angle, there's a chance they take the edge here, and that gives them a win. So right now, these rebounding numbers is what's controlling this Florida win that we have projected. Okay,
and just to reiterate, this is also, of course, taking into account that Johni Broome is, of course, not 100%, and we know that he told us on CBS Sports HQ yesterday, didn't practice yesterday, not practicing today either. So something to keep in mind, too, with all of these numbers. All right, let's get to the score, the chance to win, all of that. And again, when I'm looking at this, Mackenzie, I am just thinking, oh my God, it is going to be another game where I'm going to be taking deep breaths, sweating it out. Nothing comes easy for the Florida Gators in this tournament.
I told you they were going to have the 100% the toughest battles to the Final Four, and they are here, but they definitely had the toughest time getting here. You could say that means they're battle tested, obviously, but you look at this chart, we give them the 53% chance to win this game, and like I said, Johni Broome, really just overall the X factor. What type of shooting are you going to get from him? What type of health are you going to get from him? I'm sure we have him slightly downgraded, but we don't really know until we see him on the court here. So this could very easily go the Auburn way if we just see slightly better 2-point percent shooting, slightly better 3-point shooting.
All right, yeah, and that was Tommy Houck on that video there. Of course, Walter Clayton, who's been probably one of the best guards that we've seen in the tournament altogether. All right, so you guys have the slight edge, Florida winning by a 1 singular point. Let's talk about the other Final Four matchup where we have Kelvin Sampson and Houston. It feels like everything is going their way. I know health was a big issue for them last go around. And then Duke, who has just been so rock solid through this entire tournament, and they have arguably the best player in all of college basketball in Cooper Flagg. Those are some of the big picture storylines, but what are the numbers telling us, Mackenzie?
Right here, we're seeing a lot more obvious picture of where we see Duke pulling away. Now, we do like Houston I'd say more than most of the public, but as far as Duke here, this number, this 52%, a lot of this, it's Cooper Flag this, Cooper Flag that. A lot of that is tied to Malawach here because this is a guy who's playing 20-plus minutes and has over 50% two-point shooting, well over. He has an awesome free throw percentage as well. He's an absolute juggernaut here, and he's really hard to stop because he's objectively larger, stronger, taller than everyone else on the basketball court. So this number really has to do with the game we're getting from him, and he doesn't really get into foul trouble because it's not like he's putting up a ton of field goal attempts. He's just such a high percentage shooter here. You talk about the turnovers. This is more contributed to Cooper Flag here because as amazing as he is with his steals and his assists, a lot of the time they come with a lot of turnovers. You saw him basically same amount of turnovers as assists when they played Alabama. So if he is having a bad three-point shooting night, you typically see him try to force the ball, and that's when we see those turnovers. So this could be the other downfall for Duke. But as far as three-point shooting, on the road, I like to look at specifically in these types of games, and that's what helps us have success all tournament is looking at road splits. Very, very even here for both of these teams. When it comes to the road, obviously Houston's one of the best three-point shooting teams, the best in the country, but on the road, Duke really holds their own, which is always something we want to account for. So if this becomes 38% and this stays 36%, that's 3 points. That could be the Houston way to win this game. So we are in such niche, fine line territory here. If Duke can control this, keep the turnovers down, stay in the three-point game with Houston, they should take this game.
All right, yeah, so the margin for error, of course, is very, very slim when it comes to the Final Four. So if the projections go this way, like the sports line model is saying, we're going to see Florida and we're going to see Duke. And I think based off of these numbers, my biggest question, because we didn't really talk about turnovers, right, in terms of Florida, but we're seeing them for Duke as well. But Florida in that Elite Eight game against Maryland, it was like the most turnovers that we saw in the first half of a basketball game in the tournament.
March, Florida has been a little messy.
We've been turning over the ball.
Messy.
So I am curious head-to-head with Duke and Florida where you guys are at, especially as it pertains to the turnovers, because that has been a big problem for the Gators, especially in the first half.
Yeah, I think that would be a problem that does bite them, but if you get the same situation from Cooper Flag, it might not be that big of a deal here. So we do overall just like Duke. Again, a lot of it has to do with Cooper Flag. Malawach, so hard to stop here. I know Florida has the depth technically, but you might not need all of it because you can't foul this guy out. You just can't. Like, he is such a unicorn in his own way here, which is why we like him so much. And between him and Flag, it just really does become hard to stop here for this Florida team. And again, another super close game, Jacqueline, but we do ultimately have Duke.
Yeah, I feel better about Florida versus Auburn than Florida versus Duke.
You
potentially.
should, 100%.
But I just keep telling myself we're battle tested. We have found a lot of different ways to win. So hey, that has to count for something, right? Kenz, we certainly appreciate it walking us through the sports line model and really breaking down the numbers and the tail of the tape. Because as you see here, it is all the one seeds that are duking it out for a national championship. It all kicks off at 6:09 Eastern with Florida and Auburn, and then of course Houston and Duke. You can watch all of it on CBS.
Scouting the tippy-top NBA talent at the Final Four. Cooper Flag is the projected #1 pick, but where is Florida All-American Walter Clayton Jr. projected to go? Right now, he's a possible late first-round pick. Clayton proved how clutch he is throughout this NCAA tournament. 13 points in the final 8 minutes in a 2-point win against UConn. Hit the go-ahead 3 with less than 3 minutes left. Then he had 13 points in the final 6 minutes in a comeback win against Texas Tech. Hit the game-tying 3 with less than 2 minutes left, and then the go-ahead 3 with under a minute to go. Dude is clutch. Clayton scored 22 of his 30 points in the second half of that game as he leads the Gators to the Final Four. Back here with certified ball knower, 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting, Adam Finkelstein. Walter Clayton Jr. making the most of his run to the Final Four with Florida. Adam, what might this mean for him on draft night?
Well, he doesn't have a whole lot of first-round buzz just yet, but I'm certainly a believer, and that's why I put him in my mock at number 25. I think when you start to talk about these NBA teams, what you see is that they don't always value shooting to the extent they should, and when that really becomes apparent, it's about a year or two after the draft class has happened. So in Clayton's case, I think that there's a pretty clear niche that he could play on an NBA roster, given the fact that he's as good of a shooter, I think, as there is in college basketball. and that he's proven he can be a primary ball handler for Todd Golden at Florida this year. That's been a big part of his development, showing that he's not an undersized two guard, that he can slide over and play the point guard position. So he's someone that I would start to think about at about 20. And I think his range probably now maybe 20 to 40, 45, but certainly in my opinion, he is a first-round caliber talent.
Walter Clayton Jr. among the National Player of the Year candidates. The top two candidates, of course, Cooper Flagg and Janai Broome. Start with the Auburn star, Adam. How does his game translate to the NBA?
Well, it's going to be vastly different than we've seen at Auburn, right? Because he's not going to be the focal point in the NBA. There's a similar dialogue here to the way we were talking about Zach Edey a year ago when he was the most dominant player in college basketball, but everybody said, geez, I'm not sure how he's going to translate to the NBA. Fortunately, I think we've learned some lessons from mistakes of last year. Edey was obviously the number 9 pick in the NBA draft. I don't think Broome is going to get that high, but I do think he has a chance to play his way into the first round and end up being a very solid backup center because of the versatility in his game. Now, I would remind viewers, you're not going to see that full versatility right now because he's really banged up. So I think he's not as mobile as he normally is. He's not going to have the same versatility on the defensive end. What you will see is the physicality, assuming he can play through that elbow injury. But what's really going to fit with the NBA, while he bullies people in the block in college, is his ability to step out and shoot and pass. That's going to give him a fit in modern offenses. And like I said, for a player who's that big and strong to have some versatility with the way he can defend pick and roll, it means he's going to be a serviceable piece to somebody's rotation at the next level.
And we could have the top two National Player of the Year candidates clashing in the national championship. Cooper Flagg is the projected number 1 pick in the upcoming NBA draft. Adam, are you willing to call Cooper Flagg a generational talent?
I'm not there quite yet, and I'm sure that's going to ruffle some feathers, but you got to win the whole thing first. And I've talked about this on HQ a few times. If he wins the whole thing, we can have this conversation on Tuesday. But if not, then it's a non-starter in my opinion. You have to win the big one, and if he doesn't, it doesn't take away from anything that he's done this season, because he does have a chance to be just the 3rd player in history to be both the National Player of the Year and the first pick in the NBA draft. If he wins the NCAA championship on top of that, he will be the only player since Anthony Davis. That in and of itself puts him in the conversation as one of the best freshmen of all time. But I do think he's got to get that championship. I think Duke is playing better than anyone right now. Cooper Flagg came into this year as the favorite to be the number 1 pick in the draft, and all he has done over the course of this year is gain separation from the rest of the field.
Yeah, I just want to be clear here, too, because when I say generational talent, I think Victor Wembanyama. And I would agree with you that, and I'm not an NBA draft analyst, but as a fan and as a broadcaster, I don't think that Cooper Flagg is on the same level as a Victor Wembanyama, who is a bona fide generational talent.
No, I'm with you. And when you say generational, you mean Wemby, you mean LeBron,
yep.
You mean K. That is a status that has to be earned, over an extended period of time. You don't earn that status before your 19th birthday. So as good as Cooper has been, and he has been better than anyone possibly expected, generational is a label that comes after years of production, after years of stardom, and he's off to a great start, but it's a little premature to put him in that category right now.
That's what we do here, though. We project, we look ahead, we want to say, where's this guy going to be? Could he have, because Zion is an incredible talent, but Zion has been hampered by injuries. Where would you put those two? Because you're talking about 2 Duke freshmen that are among the most talented freshmen we've seen in recent memory. If Cooper Flagg, we've seen Cooper Flagg deal with the ankle injury here in his freshman season, but if we're talking about a healthy Cooper Flagg in its rookie season, is this a situation where we could say, wow, he's going to blow past Zion's ability, blow past his ability in the NBA?
I think the thing with Cooper that's easier to project is the durability. Zion was always unprecedented. That size, that width, that power, that athleticism. And there were always questions about how that would hold up over the course of an 82-game schedule, over the course of extended years in the NBA. Those concerns have proven to be valid. Those concerns aren't there for Cooper. As rare as his overlap of skills are, there's nothing like that. Even with Wemby, we said, like, hey, will the body hold up? That's what we were talking about with Wemby. That's what we were talking about with Zion. If you were to say to me, what are the possible reasons that Cooper doesn't pan out? Durability would not be one of the things I'd say. Coming into the year, I would have said maybe the shooting doesn't hold up. Coming into the year, I would have said maybe he doesn't prove that he can be a primary playmaker on an NBA championship team. I think that's something that still needs to play out. I think he's answered the questions about his shooting, shot over 40% in ACC play from behind the three-point line this year. But durability, which is so critical to your long-term NBA future, is not something that we're overly worried about at this point.
He could become the 4th freshman to lead a national champion in scoring, joining Carmelo Anthony, Anthony Davis, and Jahlil Okafor. 3 days away from the Final Four, 84 days away from day 1 of the NBA draft. Adam Finkelstein here with us on CBS Sports HQ. Adam, thank you. And hey, here's a look at the top 10 in Adam Finkelstein's latest mock draft. Flag going #1 overall, followed by the 2 Rutgers standouts, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Then Baylor freshman VJ Edgecombe going 4th overall. Rounding out the top 5, Trey Johnson, the super talented freshman out of Texas. Adam is projecting that the first 9 picks in the NBA draft will all be freshmen. No doubt a stacked draft class in 2025.